I've really been impressed with your system-focused approach, and I'm interested in how you found your way to that system. How have you managed to choose your path as a beekeeper and avoid the pitfalls of misinformation on the internet? How have you chosen mentors or made decisions about which techniques to try for yourself in order to create the system of beekeeping that you now follow in your operation? Have there been any mistakes along the way? Can you tell us any techniques or methods you chose only to have to admit later that they weren't working? Adam. So mentorship is very important. I would suggest you get in contact with your local bee club and use their feedback as part of a giant puzzle, okay? Don't use their feedback as the template, like you're watching my videos and read my blog and such, and I'm sure you're only using my feedback here as just a piece of that big puzzle. What you want to do is you want to get a bunch of guys together, just look and see how they've developed their programs, how they've identified these problems and created programs around those problems to solve them. You can always tell how much a beekeeper really hates a job by the amount of attention they put towards it. Okay, just for an example, in my operation when I started out, I had a honey sump and a honey tank and a really old spinner that didn't take the wax out very well. So I was constantly skimming my tanks, and I hated skimming tanks. That's the worst job. If you ask me what the worst job is on the farm, that is skimming tanks. I absolutely hate skimming tanks. So what did I do? I invested a pile of money and I brought in a system to handle all my wax so I didn't have to skim the tanks anymore. And that's my Cooks and Beals wax spinner. It has been a huge relief to me and provided so much efficiency to my farm. Okay, I spent $25,000 on that. So my problem of skimming tanks was bad enough I was willing to spend $25,000 to solve it. Okay, do you see what I'm kind of getting at there? The other issue that I really hated on this farm was lifting. Lifting, I just hate lifting. My dad had a bad back ever since he was 18 years old. He slipped a disc, he lifted something too heavy. So my approach on this farm has always been developing systems to avoid lifting. And that's where the easy loader comes in. That's Dad told me right off the start, he said, if you're going to get in this business, I see there's a lot of lifting in this business. If you're going to get into this business, focus on the lifting aspect of it, because I can see it's going to be hard on your back. So we invested in the easy loader. I adopted a bunch of techniques which allowed me to harvest my honey without lifting boxes. We have a really good forklift. Everything's on pallets. My extractor, there's systems put into place so we don't have to do hardly any manual labor of these heavy boxes. Everything is there to use. Yeah, and I mean, you just develop the systems around the programs that you want to address. And you're going to find that you talk to a number of beekeepers, you're going to see all these issues which they point out very specifically in their management as their main concerns that they wanted to address. And by talking to a variety of beekeepers, you just get this flood of innovation and inspiration, just different approaches to tackle the same jobs, right? And it just helps inspire you to look at your operations. It's just a little bit differently. Maybe say, hey, there's a great spot I can incorporate some of these ideas. You'll have problems. As beekeepers, we run into problems, and it always seems like we're always in the dark. It doesn't matter how experienced you are, you're going to run into problems. You're going to be caught on your heels. You don't know how to react. You don't know what you're seeing in the hives. You don't really know what's going on. You need some feedback. You need some feedback from somebody else. Just, hey, I'm seeing this situation, and it seems to be rather unique, and I just need some help to address this. What do you think about it? And you'll get some feedback from that guy, and you'll get some feedback from that guy, and as long as they're willing and have enough time to address your problem. First off, we're dealing with bugs in a box. I mean, seriously. And then we're dealing with nature. The interaction with our hives, with what's going on out in nature, there's dynamics going on that we have a hard time reading because we're so focused on our work, right? So we miss a lot of cues. And when things happen, sometimes we're back on our heels and we're saying, whoa, what's going on? We don't know what's going on. By talking to other beekeepers and getting their feedback is very important, because it just provides you a little bit of a second opinion and just, a second view at things, and just helps you bring the whole picture back together. So that's my take on mentorship. I find them very important, especially me. Like I have 4 or 5 guys in my back pocket that I contact all the time. Some guys give me very little feedback, but very pertinent. Other guys will give me pages of feedback, which I go through and I extract what I need from them. So take it with a grain of salt and use it just as puzzle pieces in your program, right? So the other question you asked was about were there any mistakes I made along the way that I had to admit later that they weren't working? I don't know if I could say that any of my techniques that I adopted earlier on that I don't use now, I can't really say those are mistakes. When you're influenced with all these ideas out there about how to handle problems and how to address the issues, you're going to adopt a whole variety of ideas, okay? And you're going to test them out. That's what I do. I test them out into my operation. When you test them out, you build and you invest into a little bit of infrastructure just to see if it's going to work for you. And whether the technique is a good idea or a bad idea, you don't really know until you try it out, right? So it's good to keep an open mind to explore these ideas, and sometimes it's good to follow down this path just to see if there's any potential there. And you're not really going to know until you try it out. Just try not to dump everything you have into that idea until you actually know it's going to work out. Just a few examples of techniques that I adopted and tried out and I tossed aside. And what I say here doesn't necessarily mean that these practices don't work. It's just they didn't fit for my operation, okay? One of them was, let's say, screen bottom boards. I adopted that earlier on. The theory behind them is very sound. Just for me, it just didn't work out. They're too drafty. I like having a solid board just to provide some protection from underneath from that wind, that draft coming up. And I found the ants just had a clear path straight into the hive. The hives couldn't defend themselves. So then what I did is I tried developing a board that'd slide in so I could close off the screen bottom board. And then all that did was create just a wax moth haven underneath. So screen bottom boards was a short-lived idea in my operation. Another one was frame feeders. I tried frame feeders, but they just didn't work for my operation. I used single boxes through my management. I needed that frame to winter on. So taking the frames in and out was just too much work, so I adopted the hive top feeder pail method. Another method that I've adopted, and I'm just kind of phasing out right now, is 5-frame nukes. You can cut a standard box in half, and then you got two nukes. So you can use up some of your called out boxes that way, make them into nukes. They work out really well that way, just they're too tight. I can't get my 5 frames in. I find 4 frames isn't quite enough. I know guys that just use 4 frames, but the 4 frames, I like my frames tighter than that, but 5 frames is just too tight. I adopted 6-frame nukes, and I found that extra frame in there. The 6 frames, the bees have just done so much better, so much easier in a 6-frame box than it was in a 5-frame. One of the biggest techniques that I quickly switched from was mixing sugar. What a asshole of a job that is. I got to a point, I got an old washing machine actually, and I dumped bags of sugar into the washing machine and then agitated it with hot water and then pumped them out into my tank, and it seemed to work fairly well. Just as a lot of work, and you can never get the amount of sugar you want into that solution. It always settles out. So you fill these syrup pails with sugar that you just mixed, and the sugar settles on the bottom of the pail, and then it plugs up your screens so the bees can't access the sugar water. I'm quite fortunate that I have Bee Made within an hour's drive of me. They have bulk sucrose for sale. So I just have this little tote I throw in the back of the truck, and in the early days I drove into Winnipeg and just picked up the syrup. So much easier, and basically the same price. I mean, maybe a little bit more money, but I mean, Jesus guys. I'm to a point now that I buy in semi-loads of syrup. So I have 3 bulk tanks, which I bring in semi-loads of syrup in for spring and especially for the fall. So not having to mix syrup is one of those things. Another annoyance, I'd call this more so annoyance, all these years I've been trying to capture bees on the hot room window and somehow try to channel them outside and not have to sweep the windows every day. And I've tried almost every technique there is in the book. You know, the bees gather in this side, so you make a little escape on this side, and then the bees decide they don't want to go out that anymore. They want to go out this side of the window, so then you make an escape portion out this side of the window, and you try to create these little mazes to get them outside, and then you put all that work into that, and then they just cluster over it. They don't actually use them, and it's just bang my head against the wall. I find you make these little escapes that allow the bees out, and the bees can't get back in, but those bloody wasps, they know how to get through those cones. So I found the easiest thing to do is stop wasting my time trying to make these and develop these little traps and mechanisms to get these bees out of my hot room, and just walk over with a pail and a brush every day and just sweep them off the window. That's the easiest thing to do. And I have a shop vac right now that I suck the bees off the windows and the walls right now. It's a little bit hard on the bees, but I mean, when the bees are clustered right on the top of the ceiling, I have an extended hose on the stick, and I just kind of suck the bees up like that, and that works really well. As far as farm strategy, a lot of it has to do with investment. Buy yourself a good extractor. I have a Cowan 60 frame extractor. It's turnkey. You can get anybody to work on that machine, and I have that Cooks and Beals wax separator. It runs itself. Forklifts. If you have a forklift, then you can palletize everything, and then you're not throw that trolley away. That's the first thing I did. So I threw that, as soon as I got a forklift, like lifting capacity, I threw the trolley away, so there's no excuse to use it. And everything went on pallets. And as soon as you manage everything on pallets, you don't do anything without pallets. So then everything's done with forklifts, and I do everything with the easy loader. So then you're not lifting at all. Everything is just much easier. Space. When you build your honey house, I'm going to be making a video later on about my honey house, because guys are asking on how they should build theirs or renovate their honey houses. One big factor is space. Don't build walls. Build walls only where you have to. Your hot room, make a great big hot room. Then you can just fill it full of boxes if you have to. And then when you're not using it, use it as like a shed. And don't worry about that little bit of time you have to heat that extra space. It'll cost you maybe for a month, but it is so nice running forklifts without having to go through the alleyways and avoiding walls. It just buys you so much more option. That's what I found anyways. Same with your extracting room. You like a high ceiling. I have a 12-foot ceiling, which is adequate for my honey house. You don't really need it any higher than that, but 14 feet would probably be nice because you could stack a little bit higher. The biggest thing about my 12-foot ceiling is if I were ever to sell this yard, the resale on my shed being a 12-foot ceiling is pretty much zero, because none of the farmers around here can use a 12-foot ceiling anymore. They're all 16, 18 feet now because the machinery is getting so tall. So just, how far down the line do you want to look? So I hope that rambling has answered your questions. Basically what I'm getting at is, connect with a lot of mentors, listen to the feedback, keep your mind open to ideas. As far as adopting techniques, tread lightly, be smart about it, but don't be afraid to try new ideas, and focus on your priorities. Put together like a business plan, create some kind of direction in your business, where you want to see your business go. List out all the problems you want to address, and then focus on them. Develop programs around them to address them, and build your business around that. And before you know it, it all comes together into a workable plan, and then you'll have a business that works for you. So I hope that's helped you out, and keep in touch.